Everybody here. It's a little past 11 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started with a few housekeeping items. So first of all, for our attendees who are joining us today, this is a recorded session, and all of the attendees' videos, your video is not up and your lines are muted. So we will be using the question and answer chat feature. If you have any questions or if you're having any issues with your audio or connection, feel free to use that, and we'll be able to address either the question and or issue. All right. So again, we're excited to have you. My name's Taylor Jackson. I'm the CEO here at the Home Builders Association of Greater Austin. This is a program that we've put together with Downtown Austin Alliance and Austin Board of Realtors. So at this point, I don't want to waste any more time. I'm going to turn this over to introduce Emily.
Thanks so much, Taylor. Good morning. Emily Chenevert. I'm the CEO of the Austin Board of Realtors. We're going to start with a really quick primer just to be sure that we're all on the same page with our collective understanding of what we're really talking about today. There are 8 propositions on the May ballot for Austin voters, and this forum is going to focus on 5 of those with a special focus on Prop F, the kind of big one at the table. Proposition D would move the mayoral election to align with presidential election years as opposed to aligning it as it does today with the gubernatorial election. Proposition E will automatically bring ranked choice voting to Austin if the state legislature allows for that to be a practice that we can pursue. In a ranked choice voting system, citizens rank the candidates from favorite to least favorite when voting. This prevents a runoff in elections. Here's the big one. Proposition F would change the form of government Austin operates under from council manager to strong mayor. If passed, Austin would no longer have an unelected chief executive city manager, and future mayors would also have the opportunity to have veto power over all legislation voted on by council and have the sole authority to hire and fire most of our department heads. Proposition G would add an additional geographic council district, which would result in an 11-member single-member district. Proposition H would create a public campaign finance system backed by taxpayer dollars, allowing each citizen to give up to $25 to 2 candidates of their choice for those that qualify for the program. This type of program is commonly referred to as democracy dollars. Now that we're kind of on the same page about our shared understanding of these topics, I want to get started by first introducing the folks that are going to be speaking with us today. Andrew Allison and Laura Hernandez-Holmes are both here today to represent Austinites for Progressive Reform. Jesus Garza is here with Austin for All People and Brian Cumbie with the Cumbie Group. Why don't I start by giving each of you an opportunity to just sort of give us an idea of where you are on these propositions with a special focus on Proposition F. Andrew, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Thanks very much for putting on this panel and for hosting the conversation this morning. As a member of Austinites for Progressive Reform, we are in favor of all 5 of the propositions listed in the slide before. These would make Austin the most pro-democracy city in the country, increasing voter turnout and representation. And we believe that Austin can be a leader by adopting all 5.
Thanks so much. Laura, you want to add anything to that for you guys?
Yes, thank you so much, Emily. I am one of the co-chairs for Austinites for Progressive Reform. Leaders in our community like Nelson Linder, the local president of the NAACP, Robbie Osley, who is a huge champion for women's rights in our community, Tom Meredith and Ali Khattah, 2 very well-known philanthropists and business leaders, join me as part of the 100-person leadership committee, all working to pass these amendments on our May 1st ballot.
Thanks so much, Laura. Brian, why don't I have you pop in? What are you representing in this conversation, and who are some of the folks you're working with?
So I'm here today representing myself as well as a group of people that are flying under the flag of Restore Leadership ATX. And we're primarily focused on the strong mayor proposition, which we are against. But we also realize the connective tissue that exists with all the propositions that are going to be up for consideration in May. So we have some opinions on those as well, but we're definitely against the strong mayor.
Got it. Thanks so much, Brian. Hey, Jesus, you want to give us your perspective for the Austin for All people?
Yes, I'm part of the Austin for All people, and I'm one of the co-chairs. Joining me as a co-chair is Mason Ayers, who's the CEO of Kirby Lane, Pastor Parker, who is the the pastor for David Chapel, and Catherine Morris, who is works for Enoch Keever, one of the law firms. She's an attorney and was previously an attorney, a general counsel rather, for Samsung here in Austin. We have gotten in terms of the message, there's been a lot of groups that have come out against Proposition F. We think it is not the direction that the city of Austin should go in. And we're anxious and looking forward to the conversation to be able to get into that detail. Any opinions that I offer about the other propositions will be on my own as a citizen of this city and not as part of Austin for All people.
Great. Thanks so much. Jesus, why don't I stick with you for a minute? Let's start by talking about primarily Prop F, and I want to focus on where the checks and balances are in the two different types of government that might result from the changes that are proposed. Where do you see the checks and balances today? What would they look like if we were to pass Prop F?
Well, let me first start by talking about in terms of our existing council manager system. The manager works for the mayor and council. He is that individual, he or she is an appointed position, but ultimately is accountable to those elected representatives of this city. And as a result, will only execute on those issues that have been approved by the members of council. And so the check is that the manager doesn't have absolute authority. In fact, all the power rests with the mayor and council. They approve the budgets, they approve the capital programs, they approve all the contracts that the city would enter into to either build or to affect development. And so really that's a pretty strong check in terms of what that person can and can't do in terms of running and governing this city. As I understand it, under the strong mayor system, the mayor would be able to virtually appoint every department head, from aviation to electric to water, wastewater. And as a consequence would bring and introduce politics into the administration of the city as we've never seen before. And the council, any items that they approve, would have the potential to be vetoed by the mayor. And as a result, it would take a 2/3 vote by the council to override that veto. And that is a tall political hurdle in any political environment, at the state, at the federal level, or at the local level. So it cedes to the mayor an enormous amount of power in terms of running this city. And finally, what I'd say is we went to a 10-1 system so we could increase and enhance geographic representation throughout our city. We're in the infancy of 10-1. And now that those individuals are getting represented and they have a seat at the table, we would be minimizing their influence in terms of affecting policy for this city, which I think would be the wrong direction for us to go.
Thanks so much. Laura, we heard from Jesus a little bit about his concern related to the politics that might be injected into the way in which we choose the professionals that manage our city. What's your response to that? And what do the checks and balances sound like to you under the two systems?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Emily, for the question. Right now, we feel that voters do not have that accountability oversight over the unelected city manager position. That rests with the 11 politicians on the dais. And, we have seen that it is very challenging for a city manager to be held accountable by the council. We've seen that city managers rarely are fired in this system of government. In fact, it's been over 60 years since a city manager has been fired. And in that time period, 17 mayors have been democratically elected by the voters. We feel that is a better way to choose the executive, the person who has the most power are in City Hall who has oversight over all of those professionals running the city departments, because those professionals would have to answer to one person who ultimately answers to the voters. It's if the council does not take action to fire the city manager, the voters simply don't have any recourse beyond holding their city council member accountable. And really, the voter only has 2 votes on city council, right? Their city council member and their mayor. So it's extremely challenging for a voter to ultimately hold this unelected city manager accountable. I want Andrew to weigh in also on this, because I think it's important to recognize the differences between the status quo and what Prop F is proposing.
Sure. Andrew, do you want to comment on the checks and balances and where the authority lies in the 2 forms?
Sure, I'd be happy to. We're one of the few large cities in the country where an unelected city manager has control over the executive functions of the city. And we're talking here about drafting the budget, overseeing the police, overseeing transportation and planning, and so many other services that businesses and residents rely on. The system that we're talking about is nothing foreign to us as Americans. We're talking about 2 co-equal branches of government in the strong mayor system: a legislative branch, the council, an executive branch, the mayor, both independent of each other with separation of powers, no branch more superior than the other, checks and balances between the 2. I'll talk about the veto there in a second. The key difference between the system we have right now, as Laura pointed out, and the system that we could have is that voters would be in charge of selecting the person who makes so many decisions about the day-to-day environment of our city and our long-term direction as a city as well. I think opponents make an issue of the veto power that the mayor would have, but we have to point out first that any mayor's veto can be overridden with a 2/3 vote of the council. That is a simple standard that, of course, we're familiar with from other levels of government. 2/3 votes at the council happen every Thursday. It is a completely feasible override process, and it puts the council with the final say, gives them the final say over all legislation and the budget. The critical difference here is that we would have democratically elected executives. And I think that that is the thing that we have to focus on, is whether or not we trust voters to decide who should lead our city, and whether we can join big cities across the country that do the same thing.
Brian, you want to add any comments to this?
Well, first of all, I'm privileged to be on this call on this side of this issue, and I want to thank Andrew and Laura for the passion you're bringing to the other side. I think it's important that we have a good public debate about this. I've participated in city politics within the business community for approximately 30 years. I had the good pleasure of watching Jesus Garza, who was one of the finest representatives of a professional city manager that I think you could point to. I watched the partnership that he forged with an exceptionally strong mayor named Kirk Watson, and they managed to help create public policy through the late 90s that have been nothing short of astonishing. I mean, we have basically put Austin in a position where we are the envy of most other major cities in the United States, if not the world, in terms of what we've been able to create here. So I think there are several reasons that I'm opposed to the strong mayor. I think one of the things that concerns me the most is that it cedes an enormous amount of power in one person. And that one person may or may not have the qualifications necessary to understand the inner workings of a fairly vast bureaucracy that is very challenging, number one. Number two, I think some of the finest examples that we have in the 30 years that I've been in Austin about public policy have come about through the need to develop collaboration and work together to try to find common ground. And I think that the opportunity to do that is greater when you have the 10-1 form of government as opposed to strong. So I think you kind of have the best of both worlds. I think it's interesting that proponents of strong mayor believe that it represents a greater opportunity for democracy. I disagree. I think the greatest opportunity for democracy is continuing to rely on the strength that each council member brings to the table and to the public debate, representing what their constituency and their district are most interested in. So I think you have something that's working, and I don't really understand why we need to change it. And I'm not in favor of the strong mayor.
Thanks so much. I appreciate the focus that you guys are bringing to the power and the politics that are at play with regards to the two different systems. But one of the things that's probably even more important than that is the business of the city and the competencies that it takes to manage a city properly, and certainly a city of our size and one growing as fast as we are. So Andrew, talk to me a little bit about what it looks like when an elected mayor who may or may not have the skill set to operate as a city manager does with the same professional credentials manages the city so directly.
Sure. Well, one thing we know from looking at strong mayor cities from across the country, and again, 2/3 of all large cities are strong mayor cities, is that professional management does not go away. We still would have professional managers leading departments, leading at the cabinet level almost for the city. Think about assistant city managers and city manager type roles. Think about professional managers in COO type roles underneath a CEO, the mayor. Those professional managers exist across the country. They are experienced, they are visionary, they are elected, they're put into office by someone elected to put in place an agenda supported by the voters. And the critical difference between a system we have right now, where the city manager has total control currently over those appointees. The city manager today can appoint ACMs and department heads without any oversight by the council or confirmation by the council. So what we're proposing is that an elected CEO, the mayor, should have that same ability to appoint professional managers to departments. And then we can hold the mayor accountable for how they do that job. Any mayor is going to want to make sure that services run well, that the city moves forward, that we address our challenges swiftly and urgently. And so they will have every incentive in the world to make sure that those positions are staffed by capable people, as we've seen from cities across the country. The benefit we get is that then we get to make sure that they're doing so in line with our interests, our values, the needs we have in the city. I think we only need to look back at 2018, when our city manager came into office and asked for the resignations of all ACMs. We can have turnover in both systems. We've seen turnover in this system here. We'll have turnover in the new system, of course. The key difference is, do you want someone who's unelected making those decisions or somebody who reports to all of us?
Hey, Sus, I think you're in an interesting position to speak to this, given you've had the job. So speak a little bit about the competencies that it takes and the differences of the role between city manager and mayor under our current government, and what that might look like moving forward.
Yes, let me, first of all, before I was appointed city manager of the city of Austin, I had experience of almost, 12 or 13 years in working in municipal government. Worked in two different cities. I worked in Corpus Christi and I worked in Austin. I think that the distinction here is, in terms of appointment, is that the administrator that Andrew just talked about just a second ago, plus all the department heads, the dilemma is that they will not work for the mayor and council. They will work for the mayor. Right now, the manager works for the mayor and council. That individual needs to be responsive to the entire body. And a manager that fails to be responsive to that entire body may be removed. Laura mentioned a minute ago that managers don't get removed. It's been 50 years or so. The fact of the matter is, I became city manager because Camille Barnett was forced out. That was tantamount to a termination. Jorge Carrasco was forced out. That was tantamount to a termination. I think managers have been moved out as when they have failed to respond to the needs of the community through the mayor and council. Finally, another thing that's a interesting aspect of this proposal is the mayor will prepare the agenda with all the department heads working with the city clerk. They will not even attend the city council meeting. The council meeting will be run by the president of the council. So here you'll have the most powerful executive within the city and will not even have access. They will not come to those meetings, so the citizens may not have access to that official. And so I think that's the dilemma of this issue. And finally, let me just say, because I keep hearing that the manager is almost runs rogue and that they do what they want. The fact is, the mayor and council have a responsibility under this system to have oversight, and that's oversight through the various committees. And they should call people on the carpet when things do not happen the way they do. And sometimes we maybe not have been as diligent about that as the elected officials have not have been as diligent about that as they should. But in my experience, that's what makes this system work, is that there's that proper oversight. Finally, when I became CM, a city manager, I did not fire everyone. In fact, I kept most everybody that was on staff. Because one, I knew some of those individuals, obviously, because I grew up in the city, but I also found them to be outstanding professionals. When you enter, what's going to happen here is you will have a layer of politics in city administration. Schedule C appointments, I think, is what they call it at the federal level, and what you'll have is just people that are involved in politics helping make decisions from an administrative level, and that would be a dilemma. Finally, I'd want to just say, the municipal government is different than the federal government. The manager only has limited contractual authority. All those issues that the president can do and that the governor can do cannot be done by the city manager. The city manager must bring those legislative items to the council to approve contracts, to approve right-of-way acquisition, purchases of property. They do not have the authority to do that on their own, because that's the way the municipal code is written, to protect the public and to ensure that there's proper checks and balances between that kind of rogue administration that's been talked about. And I think we've done a pretty good job with it here in Austin to make sure we can make progress as a city.
Thanks so much, Laura. You want to speak a little bit to the efficiencies potentially gained or the changes in the operations of the city under the form that you're supporting?
Right, absolutely. I would love to, Emily. Thank you. It was mentioned in the chat, this idea that bond ratings are better in city manager forms of government, and the research does not back that up. Financial health and bond ratings, the reviews are mixed, and anyone who's trying to tell you that one system is better than the other is just yanking your chain. The data shows that there is no big difference in efficiency, financial health, bond ratings. The one data point that is undisputed is that there is more voter participation in mayor council cities than in city manager cities. And the thought behind that is that voters see their vote in action and they are able to hold that executive accountable. And so they keep voting because they can see the executive either delivering or not on the promises that they made to the voters. But, to speak more about efficiency, part of the reason that this city manager form of government was put in place was to focus on efficiency of government spending. But I would ask, efficiency for who? Efficiency for the people who know their way around City Hall, or efficiency for the voters who need resources in their neighborhoods and are seeking more resources for their communities? I think that right now we're seeing a lack of efficiency because there's no clear accountability by the form of government that we have. You see finger pointing and you see a slowing of progress on a lot of our challenges. And I know that this city is a great place for a lot of people who have money. But for us, everyone else who isn't seeing their wages increase, but is seeing the housing shortage and is seeing the median price of homes just skyrocket, it's getting more challenging for us to live in this city. And we feel that a democratically elected executive could address those challenges in a more swift way that the city manager form of government just was not designed to do.
Got it. Hey, I want to remind all of our participants that you guys are welcome to add questions to the Q&A feature in Zoom in the webinar. We're keeping an eye on that. I haven't seen any yet. But Brian, do you want to weigh in on the opportunity for either improved or reduced efficiency pending how this turns out?
I would like to weigh in on that, and I appreciate the comments that Laura and Andrew have made, and I really appreciate the comments of Jesus Garza, because he managed the bureaucracy directly for longer than most people have been, longer than a whole lot of people that now live in Austin have been here. That we need greater efficiency in the bureaucracy. I have a front row seat to the opportunities that are available to us as a community to do things that are meaningful, that can take cost out of housing, starting with an updated land development code, starting with a complete and thorough review of what it takes to get a thoughtful project permitted for construction in this city. In some ways, we've become a victim of our own success, but I don't believe that you have to change the form of government in order to correct course on some badly needed adjustments to public policy. In fact, I think it can be counterproductive. I can tell you, just to make a comment that kind of encapsulates this. I mean, you could have, if you had a strong mayor form of government, what if you had a mayor that was elected that was a real estate developer? And would the policies that that strong mayor brings to the office, along with the political appointees that that person may appoint into key positions within the bureaucracy, represent people that perhaps are more sensitive about how Austin's going to be developed? Conversely, if you had somebody that was an anti-development person hold the office, you might see the same thing. So I think that's one of the best examples of where a council manager 10-1 form of government forces a public debate around how we're going to grow and how we're going to manage the issues that we've got to grapple with in order to continue to build a great city. I also want to point out that I would invite Laura to look into this, but 66% of the cities that have a AAA bond rating from Moody's are managed by a professional city manager. So I'm not sure that I would agree that a strong mayor who may have great is going to necessarily come in and parachute into that office and be equipped to deal with all the issues that have to be dealt with in order for this bureaucracy to function and serve all the taxpayers in the most efficient way.
Well, Brian, I appreciate you speaking the love language of the three organizations hosting this panel, and that you're bringing up the land development code. The thought of an anti-development leader does send a chill down my spine, but you know, the reality is that we manage through the changes in the dynamics of the city no matter what they are. Andrew, I want to turn to you a little bit to talk about the employee base of the city. You know, there are lots of individuals who make our world go round in public service, and obviously a change like this has a very direct impact on them. What do you think happens if Prop F passes? How does that feel to them? What could it look like? Should they be concerned or not concerned?
Not concerned. I appreciate you asking that question. We have civil service protections in this city for all city employees who are below the level of department director. So only the senior most employees in our city, department directors, ACMs, are without civil service protections. The amendment in Prop F does not alter civil service at all. And so there is no risk of politicization of longtime members of senior staff or staff of the city who serve at a level below a department director or ACM. They are secure in their jobs, protected from arbitrary penalties or terminations or anything like that. And we also get democratic accountability for that senior most level of the city. So if we're concerned about things like the ability to build affordable housing in our city and the pace of our ability to keep up with rising home prices, we can hold leaders accountable for doing something about that. Right now, it takes essentially a near unanimous vote of our council to address our housing crisis. As Laura was pointing out, we get more agility out of a strong mayor system, where we can have someone who is elected by the people to solve an issue and actually put those solutions into place. It's a feature of the system that it responds to electoral need. If voters want to solve a problem, they can address it through electing a leader. That's an open and public process in a democracy, the best one that we have. If they want to go in another direction, they can do that through a process. But the answer cannot be to shield accountability, shield our leaders from accountability by not having them subject to the election outcomes of the city. And we really can't have it both ways. If the city manager reports to the council, as has been asserted, and I would direct folks to the part of the charter that says that the council cannot interfere with the city manager's business on personnel or other things like that. But if we believe that the council has that kind of authority over the manager, then we should expect the manager to respond to election outcomes. But that is not what happens. And by putting a mayor in charge of the executive branch, we can have the best of both worlds. Professional staff protected from arbitrary action, but people at the top of both branches who are responsive to us.
Thanks, Andrew. I appreciate that. And I appreciate you delineating the difference between the sort of line staff within public service and especially the assistant city manager level. Laura, what potential is there for the ACM level to become a more political play in terms of the placements that are made under a Prop F passing versus where we are today? I can speak personally to the fact that the ACM level of leadership is critical when it comes to supporting and advocating for specific issues under advocacy that you care about.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I know it was mentioned earlier, but we should recognize that there is turnover. There is turnover in those high-ranking officials in both systems, right? For example, the current city manager asked all 5 assistant city managers to reapply when he began, right? But it's a matter of thinking about it as, do you as a voter want to have accountability for that executive who oversees those professionals or not? And we have seen that mayor council systems across the country do not politicize this because it's in the interest of the elected mayor to make sure that they are hiring professionals to deliver the day-to-day operations in a smooth manner. Otherwise, they're going to be held accountable by the voters. If they put in a political appointment who's not equipped to run the departments. So we have seen that professionals are still hired and stay on in these mayor council forms of government, but the difference is now you would have oversight as a voter to make sure that the mayor's professionals are delivering on a regular basis.
Thanks so much. Brian, you manage people, you manage a pretty big business. What does it feel like to you in terms of what it might look like under a Proposition F passage at the ACM level?
Well, I think first of all, a mayor's term, unless we decide to change that too, is 4 years. I can't imagine a scenario where you might be changing complete administrations at that level of management within the bureaucracy, potentially every 4 years, which is fairly likely. I think what the taxpayers really want is some continuity in their public agencies that represent us here in the city of Austin. And I can't help but think to myself that, what we're talking about is what I hear Laura and Andrew advocating for is having greater accountability through a strong mayor. When I think we have that opportunity, and actually I think it might be even more attainable. I'd invite anybody to ask the question, if you had a strong mayor form of government versus a council manager, how do you really affect change? How accessible is the mayor going to be to the average taxpayer? Even within our 10-1 form of government, I would challenge the notion that it's easier for a resident in Clarksville or a resident in Bouldin Creek to go see the mayor. It's easier to do that and get your point across than it is to go to the council member that represents you on the city council. So I think and it's at the lowest common denominator, the system of government we have, I think, actually offers the greatest opportunity for the average Austinite to actually be heard. And I think we're talking about the wrong subject. I don't think you have to change the form of government to demand greater leadership from our elected officials. It's that simple in my mind. I think we need to demand that all of our city council members and our mayor, who's elected at large, should invest more energy in truly understanding what the hurdles are to create the public policies that are required in order to deal with our challenges on affordability, to deal with our challenges on workforce development, to deal with our challenges on transportation, to deal with our challenges on quality of life here. I just think that you don't have to have a strong mayor in office to deal with that. What you need to have is a group of elected officials that have to lock themselves in a room and try to agree, here are the challenges and here are the opportunities to solve those. And I think your chances increase exponentially when you have constant potential change from one election cycle to the next, if you have what I'll call a group of marathon runners that are managing the day-to-day activities of the city through a professional staff that's managing that activity.
Hey, Seuss, what do you think the implications are of a city manager hiring and firing ACMs versus the mayor?
Well, I mean, I think the implication would be that there might be a very rapid turnover of that level of staff. You lose that continuity. I preferred, when I was manager, to hire people to promote some people who had been in the system for a while. Jim Smith is one example of somebody I was able to convince to come help us because of his knowledge about not just land development, but just a great manager and great leader, great professional. Toby Futrell, who had worked in the city for a long time, became my deputy. These were internal appointments because I thought you needed that balance between internal and sometimes you do hire outside, but it's really to bring that those new sets of ideas. I think what would be really interesting, or not interesting, but as an issue here that would concern me, is the politics is changing. So you may have new council members that want to go in a different direction. The mayor doesn't want to go in a different direction. The council member in that district says, we need to go do these things. The mayor says, well, you know what? I don't think we need to go do those things. The staff would not be responsive to those issues because the staff works for the mayor. Now, mind you, some people think that the agenda is developed by the city clerk. It is not developed by the city clerk. The agenda is developed by all the department heads. They're the ones that set the pace for the work that needs to get done so this city can make progress. And those things end up on an agenda. All those department heads are going to work for the mayor and for the deputy mayors that the mayor may hire. And so they're going to drive that agenda. It's not going to be the city council. Now, the city council may add items from the agenda, but that's certainly not something that could not happen under this new system. It's interesting to note that the city of Houston, the strong mayor, the biggest city in Texas that is strong mayor, the other big cities in Texas are council manager. They just had an item on the agenda, or putting forward a proposal rather, that council members could put items on the council agenda in Houston that before only the mayor could control. And so it's one that they're having a debate in Houston because council members' voices have been silenced, if you will. And I think that's the dilemma. That's the issue that you've got here. Now, let me just a couple of other quick points in terms of responsiveness. Directors, ACMs, and the city manager need to be responsive to the community. And when they call about a service issue, things that need to get done within a certain neighborhood or a certain level of business, it's their job to respond to that, whether it's that call is made directly to them or is made to the mayor, to the council, when they ask the administration to do that. You've got to be responsive at the local level because there's just otherwise you can't run effectively as a city. So I think under this new system, all those things would begin to change. The dynamics would change.
But let me stick with you on that last point for just a minute, and then I'm going to ask Lauren to weigh in on this too. And if they're not responsive, if, I hear you, and that is the expectation, right? The department heads at ACMs be responsive to any issue known in the community and certainly to the community at large. But if they're not, how does the accountability change under the two? What does accountability look like today? How has it been leveraged and utilized? And what would it look like potentially Laura can share under Prop F?
One of the greatest responsibilities of the city manager of our city is to be able to use their judgment when those individuals in those department heads levels or ACMs have lost their effectiveness because either they just have a one way of doing things, and even though the community might have grown alarmed about whatever, they need to be able to make a judgment whether that person can be effective in running those sets of departments or that department specifically. If the manager can't also doesn't want to respond to that need of the community, then the council has an obligation to this city to remove that city manager because that's not, we're not being effective in those certain areas. And that's happened. I mean, I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen. This is ancient history. So a lot of these, there's a lot of younger people on this call. I mean, those things have happened where directors have lost their effectiveness simply because they couldn't see a new way of doing work that needed to get done. And so I think, but that accountability is there now, and that's why you have those committee appointments by the mayor to those various committees that have oversight over the governance of the city. And when the manager, the assistant managers, or the directors have lost effectiveness, there's got to be some not just accountability, but there has to be some responsiveness to that, or otherwise you can't stay in your job for very long.
Laura, I'm going to have you respond, and then I've got a couple of questions from chat. Go ahead.
Yes, absolutely. You know, first, I look at the challenges and the consequences of a slow system, an inherently slow system. I look at the rising cost of housing and the small supply, the lack of supply of housing. I look at the rising cost of living in general for an Austin family. Emily, these are things that your members can speak much better to than I can because they're feeling it and they are hearing it from the people that they work with every day. I think that this form of government cannot respond rapidly enough to those challenges, and it can't move in an agile manner to address those challenges. And so when I think about responsiveness and accountability in a mayor council system, I think about someone who could lead these departments with a bold vision of addressing these crises, and these departments will be accountable to present bold visions to the mayor that they can then enact swiftly, right? I think about a situation where the mayor sees a housing crisis and waives permitting fees for emergency housing because it's something that is needed in the community. Bold ideas like this are things that we might see from a mayor council form of government. But I know that my friends, from DAA are also concerned about other challenges, like our urgency with the homelessness crisis and our ability to swiftly spend dollars on the crisis that our council has already allocated and deemed a priority. There are other issues like that. They will only grow as our city grows. And I am concerned for the people who are finding it more and more challenging to live here and to thrive here.
Thanks so much. So bold and innovative can be really impactful. It can be divisive as well. And I think that the question that I've grabbed here from the chat kind of speaks to that. Brian, I want to ask you this. Doesn't a council manager form of government diffuse the money and political power of these groups over a strong mayor system? They have to sway the majority of council rather than a single elected official. What's your response to that from our chat?
I agree with that. Obviously, I think that, we, under Jesus's tenure as city manager and Kirk Watson's leadership, we went through an exhaustive process called neighborhood planning, where every neighborhood in Austin had a chance to participate in a public process to try to determine how their neighborhood was going to evolve and develop over time. And then we moved on to the 10-1 system from the at-large election system that we had before in an effort to further codify the commitment to having the areas within the city of Austin feel like they had stronger representation for what's important to them. What's important to North Austin may not be the same thing that's important to South Austin. Under a strong mayor form of government, what's important is whatever the strong mayor thinks is important. And although, with due respect to Andrew's comment earlier that you can always override the mayor with a 2/3 of the council to override a veto, I think we all understand that that can be a tall order in certain circumstances. I still think we're talking about the wrong thing. We should be talking about stronger leadership across all the council, and we should be expecting more of these folks to move more deliberately and quicker. We should be expecting them to work together to try to develop consensus. We should be expecting them to work with the neighborhood groups to try to develop consensus. The number one problem, and Laura, due respect, it's not permitting fees that's creating a stall in terms of getting housing on the ground in Austin, Texas. I can tell you, I'd probably be shot by a lot of my colleagues that may be listening, but I would gladly pay more permitting fees if I could get through the process that's required in order to go from buying a piece of land to having people move into homes that I'm building through greater efficiency. I don't think that's necessarily going to be solved alone by the form of government. And I think that as we look at our problems, we need to hold the city council and the mayor more accountable for the decisions they're making. You evoked this homeless issue. In my view, and I think we're going to talk about that, I don't understand what the council's thought process was about that. And I'm not going to go too deeply into that because I'm sure the moderators have a plan for that. But decisions have consequences. And we have made a series of choices over the past couple of decades that have led us to where we are, the good and the bad. And the more good we experience, the more obvious some of the opportunities become about areas where we need to focus to recalibrate in order to continue to provide quality of life here.
So we're most definitely not going to advocate for higher permitting fees, but Brian, not today. But Jesus, I'm going to let you comment, but I also want to pick up another question from the chat that I think speaks to this a little bit. Stephen Roberts is sharing concern generally over the directives that the council has given to the city manager in regards to homelessness, and says, what recourse does council have other than going through the lengthy and difficult process of replacing the city manager when they feel that there's a failure there? Can you speak to that a little?
Yes, I mean, I think, first of all, I think all of us, having seen what's happened when the camping ban was repealed, the consequences of that decision, and it's one that we perhaps haven't moved nearly fast enough to deal with. Two issues are there. One is you need the council committee over homelessness needed to have the proper support so that we could have the policies enacted to adequately address this issue. In my judgment, I think the staff has worried too much about politics on that matter, rather than recommending what ought to be done to move us forward and make progress. And what's happened is they wanted to sit back because the council had made that decision and they were reticent to try to bring recommendations that might be contrary to the will of the council. What happens when you make a recommendation, even though it's not politically popular, it forces that debate that Brian talked about a minute ago, where you can have that discussion about the pros and cons about how you go about dealing with that issue in a way that can be not just mostly to be able to deal with the folks that are homeless and the needs and the support they need so that they can get back into society. And I think on this one, it's one where it's not been done. And also, I think there's been focus on long-term. And the reason those dollars haven't been spent, I can tell you, when you focus on buying property, when you focus on buying hotels, when you focus on all those things that take a long time to get done, because you've not just got to negotiate with neighborhoods, you got to negotiate with the property owners for that price. You've chosen the longest term objective to be able to deal with that issue when you have a crisis at hand. And I think certainly had I been there, I would have wanted to make a recommendation to say, here's the interim steps that you've got to take to get to that final step. And right now we've started at the end, which takes a 36-month period to get done. You got to start on the short end so you can deal with that issue more effectively today. And I think that's what's been missing in that dialogue. And I would really urge everybody on the council and mayor to really begin to talk about those issues about short-term, medium-term, and long-term in a more robust way.
Can I just add to that just briefly?
Sure.
On to what Jesus is saying, I don't, what perplexes me is that what we're talking about by buying properties and motels, whatever, that takes a long time to do, it's really not addressing the root cause of the problem in the first place. And I think that if we really want to solve homelessness, or if we want to put a dent in it, we need to start by really having an honest public conversation about what the real cause of homelessness is. And we need to talk about how we're setting services up to provide to these folks to help them, if they want to be helped, find a way to higher ground. And that is completely absent from this debate over this camping ordinance.
Thanks so much. In an effort to keep us on time, I'm going to try to wrap us up with a final topic and area of interest. We made big changes just not that many years ago to a 10-1 council system. And I think that this is another opportunity for the potential of big change. I want to know, Andrew, I'll start with you. Do you think it's the right time to make another big change like this? Absolutely. I bet I know the answer, but you tell me why.
Yes, certainly we do. And there are a few reasons why. 10-1 did not change anything about how the city manager system worked. It was just a change to how the council was constituted. We haven't changed the city manager system in 100 years. And it is definitely time to do something about that, because 10-1 exposed how unresponsive the city manager system can be to voters. We just heard this conversation about how council gave direction on an issue. The staff did not respond swiftly enough, according to some. There's an assertion that the staff was concerned about politics. Well, then let's just have the staff in the executive branch be accountable to us so that voters can choose the direction of the city. Because right now we're getting finger pointing. We'll have the council point to the manager about not spending $30 million of funding last year. We'll have the manager point to the council and say that the direction was not comprehensive enough or clear enough, or some other complaint. And so this finger pointing, as Laura pointed out earlier, is not serving our community as our homelessness crisis increases, as our affordability crisis increases. And we're seeing that still under the 10-1 system, we're unable to get full responsiveness from our executive branch to the will of our voters. We're seeing that unaffordability growing. We're losing our Black population in Austin. We're losing our Latino population now, one of the only big cities in Texas to have that be the case. And we're seeing just an inability to reform how we build housing in Austin under this current system. These crises are happening under our current system. And what we're advocating for is that we consider and move to a system where voters can dictate the agenda in both branches of government.
Laura, do you have anything to add about the timing of this as another big opportunity for change? Oh, you're muted. Hate it when that happens.
I did, I knew that was going to happen at least once. I agree with Andrew, and respectfully ask you all to consider each of these reforms, right? We talked about them briefly at the beginning. They all add to the responsiveness, accountability, diversity, and representation of our local government. They all make it easier for folks to participate in the local process, and you can vote for them individually. So while I really respect this this debate and you putting these thoughtful questions together, and Jesus and Brian, it's been really a humbling experience to talk through these challenges with you. We propose, letting the people vote for their executive and these other amendments. So thank you for considering D through H on the May 1st ballot.
Thanks so much. Brian, you want to make a comment on the timing of this type of big change?
Are you speaking specifically about maybe moving to an 11-1?
No, just speaking about in relation to the 10-1 change that we made not that many years ago. Is it the right time to now propose this type of change?
I don't think so. I actually think we have a recipe that's working. I mean, we created more jobs in Austin, Texas during the global pandemic last year than any time that we started really focusing on that effort. So I think that we're doing a lot of things well here in Austin. I think things that we could do a better job on, or trying to really understand what are the root causes of some of the problems that we believe are becoming chronic in Austin that are going to be limiting factors for Austin's future. So I think the good news is anybody that's a proponent of these ballot propositions, I think we can find common ground. I think we can agree we need more affordability. I think we can agree that, you know, homelessness is not good, and it's not starting for the people that actually are experiencing homelessness. But let's try to figure out what's causing it, and let's try to go work on some real solutions to do that. And I think to throw away all the efforts that have been made over the last 30 years to try to bring more people into the process through thoughtful neighborhood planning and through moving to a 10-1 form of government, by moving to a strong mayor form, would be unfortunate. So I think that I think one of the great things about Austin, and one of the things that I've observed over the years that I've lived here, is Austin is, you never have a shortage of opinions in Austin, Texas. Pick a subject, and Jesus can speak much more to that than I can. But what I have observed is, I've observed when you have strong leaders and you have a good process, you create great public policy. And I think doing that in the light of day, and doing that through a real democratic process, which I think is represented in a 10-1 form of government, has advantages over vesting so much power in one individual.
Thanks so much. Jesus, you want to add anything, and then we'll turn it over to Taylor.
Yeah, well, I think I would agree that we have yet to completely grow into what a 10-1 system can really function like. It's in its infancy. And I think to make that change now, where you take power away from council members and place it in an elected executive, I think is a little premature. I do think these issues that we've talked about, and first of all, I want to thank Laura and Andrew for the passion that they've brought to this. I think I've participated in several forums with them, and it's just been a pleasure to be able to be with them and, you know, have a different point of view, but be able to do this the way in the Austin way, if you will. And I hadn't seen Brian in a long time, so it's great to be on the panel with Brian. You know, I think these complex issues, what hamstrings us the most is sometimes they're beyond the scope and the power of the specific municipal government. It's more of a regional issue. And I think that the ideas that the council manager system can generate to help the council deal with those issues should be and can be and should be more robust, so that we can deal with those very fundamental perplexing issues that Brian talked about the homelessness. And with respect to affordability, one of the key issues is supply. And I think I would urge and challenge the city staff to find ways to streamline that permitting process, because the more units we get on the ground, the more the units and the faster we get them on the ground, the more we'll moderate pricing and price increases in terms of our housing. But that alone is not going to solve that problem. We've got to continue to address the issues of our economic system in terms of wages, and economic systems in terms of our educational system. All those things we ought to keep focusing on as a city, so we can continue to be not just the wonderful city that we love, but also in the future continue to be that example for all other cities in Texas about what's special, how special this place is.
Amen to that. Appreciate you guys. Thank you so much, all four of you, for your participation today. Taylor, I'll turn it back to you.
Yes, and I'll just mimic. Thank you to our panelists for joining us today for a very thoughtful conversation, and thank you to our attendees. You know, we had a lot of activity in the chat, and so we definitely appreciate each and every one of you joining us here today. And thank you, Emily, for moderating this session. So again, this is a recorded session. We will be distributing this to our organizations, Austin Board of Realtors, Downtown Austin Alliance, and the Home Builders Association. So if you would like an additional copy, please reach out to one of your organizations there. So without further ado, thank you. And I hope everybody has a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good. It's great to be with everybody.
Thank you.